The day the bulldozers started eating my meadow, I thought it was a bad dream until the machine hit the row of daisies and the driver waved at me like he'd been invited. I said, "Hey, that's my land." And the man in the hard hat looked at my sign, glanced at his clipboard, and told me the paperwork said otherwise. That's how a quiet life that had been held together by fences and coffee and a stubborn little gate turned into the biggest mess I'd ever had to fix. And it all happened so fast you could lose your breath watching it. My name is Ethan Hale. I grew up on this ridge, third generation, on a patch of ground that my grandfather called a stubborn piece of earth and my mother called home. It wasn't big. It wasn't a showplace, just a strip of wild grass, a couple of maples, and a creek that hummed when it rained. I kept bees in the summer, fixed roof lines in the fall, and mowed the front lawn with an old mower that groaned like it had stories to tell. I liked that the land had a memory. It felt honest to me. So when a sign went up one cold Tuesday morning, yellow letters, plastic wrapped, Crestfield Heights Phase 2, I drove out there expecting a prank, or maybe a neighbor's idea of a joke. I didn't get a joke. I got a crew and a plot of land they claimed as theirs. It isn't dramatic at first, not the way movies show it. No one bursts through the gate with a brass band. It was quieter, more patient. Paperwork slid across desks, faxes arrived, someone stamped a form, someone else said, "That'll do." And suddenly there were stakes driven into my property and a surveyor telling me the new lot lines. The discovery was embarrassing at first, like finding out somebody had listed your bicycle on a marketplace and sold it without telling you. Then it was angrier, and then it was terrifying, the kind of fear that settles in your chest because the law doesn't always move at the speed your life needs it to. That first scene, bulldozers, the clipboard man's smile became the memory I replayed at night when I couldn't sleep. I had a deed. My name was on the deed. My family had paid taxes on that land for years. But deeds, I learned, are words on paper until someone strong-arming a township clerk decides otherwise, or until the right set of forged initials is inked on the right line. I called a lawyer named Ira Dalton, who smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and had a stare like a man who'd lived through 100 municipal hearings and come out with his hat on straight. Ira read the initial packet, rubbed his chin, then said something that made my stomach go cold and my jaw set. "They're good at looking legit. That's the trick. The people who would take your land don't look like villains. They look like committees, like neighbors in polos, like women with clipboards and men with ties. They pick words that make you nod. Then they build momentum until it's easier for a county clerk to sign than to stop." The woman at the center of the thing, Marla Kensington, was the sort of person who used the word community like it was a coat you were supposed to wear when you visited. She had a crisp haircut, a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes, and a voice practiced at the tone of comfort. She walked our ridge in heels and a blazer, clipboard in hand, explaining how Crestfield Heights would bring value to everyone. She called me Ethan and told me she'd heard there was a bit of confusion about boundaries, and she'd be happy to have coffee sometime to clear the air. When someone says they want to clear the air, what they often mean is they want to make sure you breathe the way they do. I kept my temper in those early meetings because Ira told me to. He said, "We make them look like the square ones here, and the messy one is them." So I did it his way. I took pictures of the dozers, I filmed the stakes, I copied every sheet of paper the workers left behind. We found a notarized annexation form that, on the surface, read like any other municipal filing until the notary's signature matched no one we could verify. Then we found a title transfer that had been cropped and spliced, an embarrassing amateur job that only worked if no one looked too carefully. I remember feeling a crazy mix of relief and fury when the presentable paperwork unraveled. Relief, because once you see the seams, the lie is easier to explain. Fury, because who do you call to fix a forge? While Ira and I were poking at paper, Marla started the quieter war PR. She pitched local homeowners on stability and planned growth. She hosted a meeting at the gazebo in the next town over and brought catering. She told tearful stories about families needing affordable housing, about bringing neighbors together. People are hungry for narratives that make sense. A charming story about inclusion is much easier to swallow than a boring story about property law, and suddenly the neighbors who didn't know the whole truth had an opinion. They called me names in the next-door mailbox: anti-community, the man who stops progress. Some of them believed Marla because she brought donuts. What people don't see in these stories is what happens to the person in the middle, You stop being a neighbor and you become an obstacle. Strangers show up on your property with hungry eyes and a camera phone, convinced that you're the villain because you want boundaries. I remember one woman, a recent transplant to the area, standing on my lawn with a phone, crying because she thought I was keeping her from a home. Her name was Laura. She had a baby stroller in her car. I didn't say anything about the stroller. I couldn't. Ira said later, "Emotion wins." It did. Emotion took the front page, and the facts had to shout to be heard. The county clerk was my next while politics is a cage made of smiles. The clerk told Ira that everything looked in order from his desk. The more I pushed, the more I realized it wasn't that the clerk was corrupt so much as overwhelmed. Systems for checking things were brittle and relied on trust. Someone handed in a packet stamped complete, and it vanished into the stream. I began to understand how small acts of conformancy and initial here, and approval there become a river capable of carrying a whole subdivision onto someone's land. As the fight went on, Marla got bolder. She had a developer thin, neat, and brisk who moved model homes into what used to be my meadow. They wired up a show home, staged furniture like a stage set for a life I didn't know. They left the model home's lights on at night and used the gravel road to bring in interested buyers, people who'd been told the lots were legal and bankable. The first time someone knocked on my door asking if I knew when their closing was, I laughed until I cried. There was no closing. There was no loan. There was a manufactured reality, and people were walking into it thinking it was real. Then the threat started. Not the wild, cinematic ones, more like the brush of a hand across your back that says you are small and they are many. Someone broke my upstairs window late one night. A brick through the kitchen, glass glittered on the floor. Ira put a police report in, and the officer who came out was sympathetic but careful. "If it's property damage, we can take a report," he said. "But if it's related to a civil dispute, that part's a mess." Those were the words I hated. Civil dispute. It made it sound like I and a bulldozer operator had two equal claims, like the law was a scale with both sides balanced by accident. The DA Clara Lane took interest when a former associate of the developer came to her with a folder. I remember the day the investigator called me and said simply, "You're not alone in this." The folder was full of bank transfers, shell company names, and the sort of small lies that pile together into a big crime. The developer was laundering payments, funneling HOA dues into private accounts, and the annexation had signatures that didn't match. Clara and her team threaded all of that together with patience and a kind of moral focus that felt like relief. I had worried for months that we were fighting a wall of polite acceptance. Suddenly, we had someone with a key. There's a moment in every legal fight where the language of the courtroom meets the language of real life, and the result is messy and human. The judge granted a temporary injunction immediate halt to construction in the basis of the forged documents and the PA's motion. It felt like winning, and it felt like paper. Because an injunction is a piece of paper that asks the world to pause. Marla chewed on her lower lip when the sheriff's deputy read the order. She told the deputy, "We'll comply," but the model homes still had furniture in them, and people still showed up with hopeful faces. Complying, it turned out, had 100 small loopholes. That was when I welded the gate shut. Call it a symbol if you want, maybe it was, but it was also practical. If they couldn't get heavy machinery in, they had to stop. I bought steel, rented a welder, and welded a thick bar across the opening to the gravel service road. I posted a homemade sign that said private property by the weld. It wasn't elegant. It was honest. And in the dead of night, a car pulled up with someone who wanted to talk me into letting them through. He was one of the salesman's smooth voice, cheap suit. He begged, "People have deposits, Ethan. Families are moving in." I said, "My land isn't a business you can prop open when you feel like it." He said, "You don't understand the greater good." Those are the phrases people use when they want you to back down. The eviction day was something I hadn't fully imagined until it arrived. The court order allowed deputies to enforce the evictions, and deputies are public servants, methodical until they're not. When they arrived to clear the occupied model homes, there were tears and shouts and the old sort of rage that comes from watching your life rearranged in front of you. Some of the residents had been sold the line in good faith. Others were there because they'd heard the story of easy lots and picked up a shovel. One woman held a framed photograph of herself in front of a fireplace and told a deputy, "You can't make me go. I'm home." The deputy's face tightened. He wasn't the person who put them there, and the law was a thing he had to follow. It made everyone smaller, included. When they arrested Marla, it was messy and not very cinematic. She tried to leave town, apparently left in a hurry with an armored look in her eyes, and the car she was driving clipped a gate post trying to pull away. News vans were there because a local reporter smelled scandal and ratings. I remember standing at the edge of my property, watching a queen fall off a chessboard. Marla was led away in handcuffs, still insisting to anyone who would listen that she'd been set up, that she was a scapegoat for a broader systemic failure. Some people still believed her. People like narratives tidy as they are. If a person you trusted gets taken away, sometimes you prefer a simpler villain, not the truth of complex bad faith. The criminal case moved like those things do: investigations, subpoenas, testimony. They proved the financial trail, shell companies, falsified HOA minutes, fake signatures that had been forged by someone with a pattern. The developer pleaded guilty to several counts: fraud, misappropriation, and Marla took a deal. The sentence didn't erase what had been done, and as the press cheered like it was the end of a film, I felt a hollow win. Justice is rarely cinematic. It's paperwork and restitution, and sometimes a line item that says funds returned. It was the right thing in the technical frame, but the shape of right in the world had been altered. There's an aftermath to all this that the camera crew didn't catch: the slow, grinding, ordinary work of making a place livable again. The county helped with demolition permits for the model homes unsafe, illegally site-danned. There was a week where bulldozers came back to take down what they had built. Watching the wrecking ball swing felt odd. In one frame you saw the smug glass and staged furniture fall, and in the next you saw a landscape with a hole where ambition had sat. We planted native grasses afterward, lines of seed and saplings that would take years to look like anything. I organized volunteers, folks from the local community garden, an environmental nonprofit from the next town, a group of retirees who liked to bend over and get their hands dirty. We regraded stream banks, pulled old fencing, and did the slow, stubborn work of rewilding. People came to help for different reasons. Some felt bad, friends of the folks who'd been evicted and wanted to make a gesture. Some wanted to be seen doing the right thing. But some pulled on gloves and stayed because there was a poetry to recovery. You could see your labor turn into a flight of birds, a patch of milkweed, small evidence that the place would be more than a lot number. We didn't involve kids in the early heavy work. The user in me wanted to avoid any image of children near machinery. We kept volunteers adult, focused, practical. Two things surprised me. The first was how divided the town remained. Even after convictions, there were people who'd been convinced by Marla's vision who still told me that development equals progress no matter what. They argued that I had held up opportunity. That argument kept coming up at town hall meetings, in the hardware store, and in the comments on a local paper's website. The second surprise was how powerful quiet acts could be, how pulling a weed or planting a sapling became a tiny victory on a long scoreboard. When a meadow returns bird song you didn't know you were missing, it feels like repair. I want to tell you about Ira, because without him, I might have been a small man with a lot of bitterness and not much else. Ira did the paperwork, sat through the hearings, and had an ugly habit of saying the right thing at the right time. He was the kind of lawyer who believed in persistence. He told me once, "The law is like an old fence. It'll hold if you fix the posts one by one." I like that image. It made the slog of filings and affidavits feel like real work, not some abstract hope. There were hard moments where I wanted to burn the record books and start again. There was a night I sat on the porch after a long day of hearings and thought about selling the place, about walking away to somewhere easier, quieter. I poured a coffee that made my hands shake and thought about the people who'd been moved for a story. You ask yourself if stubbornness is courage or just an inability to let go. I kept thinking of my grandfather who, when asked why he'd lived so far out, said, "Because that's where the cow's milk came from." Not noble, exactly practical, stubborn. Maybe I'm the same. The final courtroom scene was quieter than the viral clips made it seem. Evidence is blunt. It doesn't always show the human shape of pain. Bottom line, the judge signed a final determination returning title to me and setting restitution orders. There were legal fees and repairs and a savings account that had been bled dry by the whole charade. I signed papers in a room with sunlight on the floor and felt both very tired and strangely relieved. Cleaning up would take years, but the legal line was clear. But here's the thing about endings. They're never clean. Even after restitution, after demolition, after a plaque that reads, "Hail Preserve," a suggestion from a volunteer that I humored, there were conversations. People argued about whether development was entirely bad, whether regulations should be tighter, whether I had hamstrung progress. Folks in town started two camps: those who saw what had happened and wanted safeguards, and those who believed that growth, even messy growth, was inevitable. The tension was alive in Facebook threads and in lighting aisle conversations. It became obvious that the story wasn't just about me and Marla. It was about how communities decide the value of land and whose stories get believed. I started a small nonprofit to steward the land. We called it the Ridgefield Commons Trust. At first sensible, bland, then someone suggested Hail Preserve, and it stuck. We worked with ecologists to make the land a refuge, not a showpiece. We put in trails designed to let people walk without trampling the sensitive areas, and created educational signage about bees and native grasses. The preserve was part repentance, part practicality. Land needs people to care for it, and in the absence of a better plan, we could be the people. There were years of volunteers showing up early on Saturday mornings, tools over shoulders, coffee in hand. We planted milkweed to attract monarchs, removed invasive species that had trotted in with the model home landscaping, and built small boardwalks over wet areas. The work wasn't glamorous, it was grounding. It taught me patience in the same way that watching a sapling grow does, slow and steady. I don't tell this story like I've come out pure. I've got regrets. I could have done more to reach out to the people who were duped into buying lots. Maybe I should have organized sooner. Maybe I should have gotten media involved earlier. I could have been less sure I was the only person seeing the whole picture. Those are the truths that sit heavy in my chest sometimes. But I also know that hands-on work and documents carry weight. The difference between being talked at and being listened to can be a single piece of paper, a notarized signature, a single voice willing to stand in a room and say, "This is what happened." People still debate Marla on the street. There are those who say she was a symptom, not the disease. They point to zoning loopholes and lack of county oversight. I agree. I always said that if one person could do it once, a system had allowed that person to do it. We pressed to change county filing processes, to require more robust verification for annexations, and to add public notice windows for changes to property status. Some of those reforms were adopted, others stalled. Bureaucracy moves like an old animal, slow, resistant, but vulnerable to sustained pressure. On a July morning, years after the bulldozer first roared, I walked the preserve and sat at the fence by the road. I watched someone jog by with earbuds in, an old couple examine a wildflower guide. A man set up a folding chair to paint the view. Small, ordinary things. A pair of swallows skimmed over the creek. The gate I welded stayed, a posture of defiance that turned into a marker of a moment. I left a small plaque by it that says, "Here we stood our ground." And when people tell you that development is simply an economic inevitability, remember that economic arguments hide choices. We can choose what we value, and we can let values be shaped by those with the loudest voices, or we can insist that fairness and due process matter. So here's my ask, and I'll be blunt, because I've learned the cost of being nice to avoid conflict. What happened to me wasn't a fluke. It was the result of weak oversight and persuasive people willing to push boundaries. If you care about your community, get involved. Go to the township meetings, read the notices that come through your mailbox, ask questions about annexations, and don't let charming language replace documentation. That's the practical side. The other side is softer. Care for the places you love. Plant something. Teach someone the smell of fresh-turned soil. The big fights happen the same way the small ones do, slowly. I'll end with something I didn't expect to learn. The town didn't heal because one person won a case. It healed because a dozen people decided to do the slow work of repair. Some still think I overreacted. Others call me stubborn or a hero, depending on their own tastes. I don't want to be a hero. Heroes get unwanted statues. Share your stories if you've been through something similar. And if you want more videos about land, neighborhood fights, or small-town justice, say so below. If this made you think, hit share. Let's get people talking, because the conversation is where change begins.